woman who walked through the carved oak doors of St. Augustine's cathedral bore no resemblance to Charlotte Whitmore. That's what they would say later, after everything had fallen apart and been painstakingly reassembled. That's what the 300 guests whispered as they craned their necks to glimpse the bride, their faces painted with confusion and something darker, suspicion perhaps, or the peculiar thrill that comes from witnessing a society scandal unfold in real time. The Whitmore fortune had been built on copper mines and the kindness, that brutal stretch of desert territory where men went to strike it rich or die trying, and where the sun bleached bones as white as church porticos. Marcus Whitmore had spent 30 years pulling wealth from that unforgiving earth, and now he stood at the altar beside his future son-in-law, Victor Ashford, watching a stranger approach in his daughter's wedding dress. The woman wore Charlotte's veil, Charlotte's grandmother's pearl necklace, Charlotte's silk gloves. But her eyes were wrong, too wide set, the color muddy rather than that distinctive Whitmore green. Her mouth curved differently. Even her walk lacked Charlotte's particular grace, that finishing school glide that had cost Marcus $10,000 a year. Victor's hand tightened on the prayer book he held. His jaw worked beneath his perfectly groomed beard. He was a handsome man, the heir to a railroad fortune, and he'd courted Charlotte with the patient determination of someone who understood that merging empires required strategy as much as sentiment. "What is this?" Marcus hissed, his voice barely audible over the swelling organ music. But the woman kept coming, step after measured step, her face hidden behind yards of imported lace. In the back of the cathedral, pressed against a cool stone wall in her gray uniform, Rosa Delgado felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to still them. She'd worked in the Whitmore mansion for 6 years, ever since she'd arrived in San Francisco from the kindness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter of reference from a copper mine foreman. Her father had died saving from a cave-in. She knew exactly who was walking down that aisle, and she knew where Charlotte was. The revelation had come 3 days ago, when Rose had gone to Charlotte's room with fresh linens and found it empty, not just empty, but ransacked. Drawers hung open. The wardrobe gaped. The window stood wide to the fog rolling in from the bay. On the floor, partially hidden under the bed, Rose had found a note in Charlotte's distinctive handwriting. "I can't marry him. I won't be sold like copper shares. Forgive me." Rose had stood there for what felt like hours, that note trembling in her hand, understanding in an instant what Charlotte had done and what would cost. The Whitmore name, Marcus's standing in society, the carefully negotiated alliance between two of California's most powerful families. And then, the next morning, Charlotte had appeared again, except it wasn't Charlotte. Rose had watched from the servants' corridor as this imposter moved through the house, accepting congratulations, murmuring in a voice coached to approximate Charlotte's boarding school diction. She'd watched Marcus, too, his brow furrowed, clearly sensing something amiss but unable to name it, unwilling perhaps to acknowledge that his daughter might have betrayed him so completely. Now, as the false bride reached the altar, Rosa made her decision. "Stop." The word echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot. 300 heads swiveled toward the back of the church. The organ music stumbled, then died. Rosa pushed herself away from the wall. Her legs carried her forward even as her mind screamed at her to stay silent, to keep her position, to let the wealthy sort out their own disasters. But she'd made a promise to Charlotte once, years ago, after finding her crying in the garden following a particularly brutal argument with her father about her future, about duty and obligation and the weight of the Whitmore name. "If I could ever help you," Rosa had said, "I would, even if it cost you everything." Charlotte had asked, her green eyes searching Rosa's face. Even then, "This woman," Rosa said, her voice gaining strength as she walked down the center aisle, her shoes clicking on marble, "is not Charlotte Whitmore." The gasp that rippled through the congregation was like wine through dry grass. Marcus's face went purple. Victor stepped back, hand raised as if to ward off a blow. The bride stood frozen, veiled and silent. "Have you lost your mind?" Marcus thundered. "Guards, remove this woman immediately." "Sir." Rosa stopped 10 feet from the altar, her hands still clasped to keep them steady. "With respect, I know Miss Charlotte. I know the scar on her left wrist from when she fell from her horse at 12. I know she has 3 freckles below her right ear that she powders over. I know she writes with her left hand, but eats with her right because her tutors force her to switch. This is insane, Victor said, but his voice wavered. Then let her show you, Rosa said quietly. Let her remove the veil. Let her write her name. Let her show you her wrist. Marcus turned to Bride, and in that moment, Rosa saw everything she needed to see in his eyes. The doubt that had been gnawing at him for 3 days, the terrible suspicion he'd been suppressing, the fear that his daughter had escaped him and he'd been too proud to admit it. Remove the veil, he said hoarsely. The woman didn't move. I said remove it. Still nothing. And then, slowly, the bride began to back away. She'd made it 3 steps before Victor grabbed her arm. The veil tore as she tried to wrench free, and there, exposed for all the congregation to see, was a face that resembled Charlotte Whitmore the way a sketch resembles a photograph. Close enough to fool someone who wanted to be fooled, but nothing more. The cathedral erupted. Guests surged to their feet. The imposter! Rosa would learn later she was an actress from the Barbary Coast, hired by someone still unknown, was seized by Marcus's security men. Victor stood white-faced and shaking, his railroad empire alliance crumbling around him, and Rosa turned and walked back down the aisle, out to the carved oak doors, into the San Francisco sunlight. She found Charlotte 3 hours later, at a boarding house near the docks, her carpet bag already packed. Charlotte stood when Rosa entered, her face a mixture of relief and shame and desperate hope. You told them, Charlotte said. I told them. You've lost everything. Your position, your reputation. Miss Charlotte, Rosa said gently, you once asked me if I would help you even if it cost me everything. I meant what I said. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. Why? Why would you do this for me? Rosa thought about her own father, who died in the kindness because he'd saved a mine owner's foreman instead of himself. She thought about the letter of reference that had given her a new life, even as it chained her to service in someone else's house. She thought about all the ways the wealthy and powerful assumed their choices mattered more than anyone else's, and how rarely anyone challenged that assumption. Because, she said, everyone deserved the chance to choose their own life, even millionaires' daughters, especially them. Charlotte reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. I can't give you back what you've lost, but I can... Rosa raised a hand. Keep it. Use it to build whatever life you're running toward. Then what will you do? Rosa smiled, surprising herself. I don't know, but for the first time in 6 years, I get to decide. They parted at the docks, Charlotte heading for the steamer that would take her north to Portland, and whatever waited there, Rosa walking back toward a city that would never look at her quite the same way again. Behind them, the afternoon sun beat down on San Francisco's hills with an intensity that reminded Rosa of the kindness, that hard, honest light that showed everything exactly as it was, without mercy or pretense. The scandal burned through society pages for weeks. Marcus Whitmore retreated to his mansion and refused all visitors. Victor Asher returned to his railroads, his pride wounded but his fortune intact. The actress was paid handsomely, Rosa heard, for her silence about whoever had hired her. And Rosa Delgado found work in a different kind of house, a boarding establishment for women who'd left positions in service, run by a collective that asked no questions about references or past employers. She never heard from Charlotte again, but sometimes, late at night, she imagined that somewhere up the coast, a young woman with green eyes was finally living a life she'd chosen. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.